Hello everyone and welcome to this special Zoom lecture with ATW Senior Weaver Amy Cornall as part of Open House Melbourne's digital programming. And before I start, I would like to thank the team at ATW and particularly Adrienne Haywood for making this possible today. Behind me is the in-progress weaving of Il Pili, which has now been completed. This was designed by artist Pepe Jangula Carroll and woven by Pamela Joyce, Chris Kocius, Cheryl Thornton and Sue Batten. My name is Caroline Johnston and I'm the convener of the Friends of the Australian Tapestry Workshop. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the Boonwurrung and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land from which I'm zooming in today. I would also like to pay respect to their elders past, present and future and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians present. As we cannot physically be at the ATW today for Open House Melbourne, Amy has kindly agreed to talk about how ATW's large-scale tapestries are created at our Lightfield studio in South Melbourne. Today, she will discuss some of the exciting projects she has woven at the ATW and will show how the ATW Weavers interpret designs to create contemporary hand-woven tapestry. Amy Cornall is a highly experienced senior weaver at the Australian Tapestry Workshop. Amy first started at the ATW in 2004, while completing an honours degree of Bachelor of Fine Art Tapestry through Monash University. Amy has worked on a number of major tapestries, including Plant Song, designed by Janet Laurence, Bridle Track Hill End, designed by Luke Sciberras for Bathurst Regional Art Gallery, Alice Bayke, designed by Yvonne Todd for Queensland Art Gallery, and Abstract Structure 2007, designed by Roger Kemp for the National Gallery of Victoria. Now, before we start, I'd like to remind you, if you'd like to ask a question during the talk, please send them through by clicking the Q&A button and not the chat button. So through the Q&A button, we'll try and answer as many of your questions as possible at the end of the lecture. I would now like to welcome Amy Carroll to speak. Amy, thank you for joining us today, and I'll hand over to you now to start.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amy Cornall. I am a senior weaver at the Australian Tapestry Workshop in Melbourne. Welcome to this special talk for Open House Melbourne. We are sorry we couldn't have everybody on site today. Thank you, Caroline, for that wonderful introduction. Today, I'm going to discuss some of the exciting projects I have worked on at the ATW and explain a little bit about how we interpret designs to create contemporary hand-woven tapestry. I've got a couple of slides to show you, and I'll just pop those up on our screen so we can all see them. Okay, so this beautiful shot, this is the facade of our building that houses the ATW in South Melbourne. This is a heritage listed building. It was formerly the Harcourt and Parry Emporium in Park Street. This building was erected in 1885 as a drapery establishment for the pioneer Victorian colonist Edward Harcourt. It was designed by prominent Melbourne architect T.C. Crouch and was later adapted for use as the Patros knitting mills. And you can actually still see up on the facade there, you can see Patros knitting. It's one of the finest commercial buildings of the 1880s in inner suburban Melbourne and is a distinctive example of Victorian Free Gothic architecture style. So one of my favorite things about this building is that from inside the building, we can actually see this tower up here. We can see the reverse side of it from inside because the ceiling is a sawtooth roof and it has windows in the ceiling. I'm going to go to the next one, if it'll work for me. Since its establishment in 1976, the Australian Tapestry Workshop has built a worldwide reputation for the creation of contemporary tapestries in collaboration with living artists, designers, and architects. There we go. During this time, the ATW has woven over 500 tapestries, which hang in significant public and private collections, both nationally and internationally. The ATW thrives on working with contemporary artists who seek to challenge our weavers by providing stimulating and testing designs in a wide range of mediums, including drawing, digital images, photography, painting, ceramics, watercolor, and collage. The ATW is renowned for an artistic philosophy of shared creative endeavour between artists and weavers, as well as recognising the weavers as artists in their own right, and the core principle of collaboration and interaction between artist, weaver, and our dyer. In 1976, a renovation by Peter Carmichael transformed what had become a derelict, dingy factory space into a spacious, light-filled studio, a perfect home for the establishment of the ATW. In 2001, further renovations were carried out by William Bogue architects to include new public areas, the wool shop, gallery space, and weaving annex. Today, the building is a large and flexible space that accommodates the creation of tapestries, and the large windows in the sawtooth roof provide the perfect natural light for weaving. So here we're going to go through a very quick crash course in tapestry history, just to give you some context. While we are geographically far from the long-established traditional centres of tapestry, the ATW's inherited textile legacy has a long history across many cultures. One of the most important tapestry suites is the Lady and the Unicorn suite in Paris, which you can see on the screen. Changes in taste and preference for painting during the Renaissance led to the decline in demand for tapestry in Europe. The revival of tapestry in the second half of the 19th century was fueled by the interests of the arts and crafts movement, notably that of William Morris. Tapestry, carpet weaving, and embroidery captured the attention of Morris, who founded the Merton Abbey Tapestry Studio in England in 1881. William Morris's advocacy for the craftsmanship and integral role of the maker led to the establishment of the Dovecot Studios in Edinburgh, Scotland in 1912. Dovecot Studios became very influential as weavers were seen as artists. At around the same time, French artist and weaver Jean Lesat was largely responsible for the revival of tapestry in France in the 20th century, working with artists like Picasso. By the mid-1950s, a fascination for tapestry in Australia had started to grow. Australian artists such as Arthur Boyd, John Coburn, Sidney Nolan, John Olsen were strongly influenced by this revival of tapestry in Europe. And these are some of, we have a John Olsen here up on the top right. So they began sending their tapestry designs to well-known international workshops in Aubusson in France and in Portalegre in Portugal, as there was nowhere in Australia to weave them. Artistic enthusiasm for the tapestry medium, in combination with the emergence of the studio crafts movement, including that of many independent weavers, inspired the idea of establishing a tapestry workshop in Melbourne, Australia. So how do we weave a tapestry? Each ATW tapestry is unique and hand-woven by a team of specialist weavers using the traditional Gobelins technique, in which an image is formed by tightly packing layers of the weft, which is the horizontal strands, over the warps, which are the vertical strands. So as you can see in this image, the weft is discontinuous, meaning that shapes and forms are built up gradually, and the weft threads seldom pass completely from one side of the work to the other. So this differs from cloth weaving, where the weft would run completely from one selvage to the other selvage. We create the image using a combination of different methods, building shapes, formal hatching, informal hatching, and color blending. We also use single and double wraps to create vertical lines and other weaving techniques such as half passing and sumac. Our wefts consist of multiple strands of wool and or cotton, varying color, which allows us as weavers to control and manipulate hue and tone. Here you can see bobbins made up of between 10 to 12 strands of yarn in various shades of blue. Blending multiple colors in this way enables us to create subtle color shifts over large areas of weaving, or to quickly morph from one color to another. The colors used reflect what is needed in the design. They can be highly contrasting or very close in hue and tone, and anything in between. The scale of the tapestry can help determine this. Large architectural scale tapestries will often require higher contrast in the bobbin mixes, as this heightens their visual impact from a greater viewing distance. We have a specialist chemist, a dye tech, on staff to dye our yarns, as the quality and availability and consistency of our tapestry yarns is incredibly important. Our dyer is responsible for dyeing a base palette of 370 wool colours and about 200 cotton colours in small, highly controlled batches, as well as custom colours required by the weavers. Pictured in this gorgeous image of our yarn shop, which you can visit. This is about half of our colour range. Only the best light fast and colour fast dyes are used, and additional colours can be developed to meet specific project requirements. All ATW tapestries are woven using the finest Australian wool, which is grown using environmentally sustainable and humane animal practices. Here we go. This is Tony, our dyer, Tony Stefanovsky, at work in our colour laboratory. If you ever get a chance to do an on-site tour, we have a mezzanine level which overlooks the weaving floor and also has a viewing window which enables visitors to see inside the dye lab. In addition to our regular range of wools and colours, if we need a particular colour created, especially for a project, Tony can create it. Typically, that colour will then be considered a special, and it will be named for the artist whose tapestry it was created for. For example, in our wool shelves, we have a Patrick Heron blue, a Nell black, and a Janet Laurence apple green, amongst others. In order to guide the interpretation of a large tapestry, the weaving team creates a range of samples that experiment with different warp settings and color relationships, the scale and ways of translating the design into the medium of tapestry. The weavers can also draw inspiration and knowledge from our expansive sample archive. So creating samples, and you can see these like little swatches on the right-hand side there. This is really important because it can be quite difficult to describe a visual idea or a solution using only words. It's hard to describe a color with the words that we have. It's also a problem-solving process. It enables us to explore the many possible approaches to interpreting a design into tapestry. Often I like to think of it as something kind of like a proof of concept, so you can show that, yes, the idea that is in your head that you think will work is actually a viable idea. Once the samples have been woven, the designing artist or architect will meet with the weavers to discuss the samples, resulting in a dynamic creative exchange, which ultimately sets the creative direction for each tapestry. Artists, clients, and architects can then begin to imagine how the finished tapestry may look, and their feedback and their intentions for the work, and importantly, the space in which it will inhabit, act as guiding principles for us as weavers as we make decisions throughout the weaving process. So to start with, the loom is warped up and the cartoon is drawn, and these kind of happen simultaneously. Traditionally, the cartoon is a sketch based on the artwork, which serves as a map or a guide for the tapestry. At the ATW, this is typically either a black and white photographic enlargement or a line drawing or a combination of both. The cartoon is then mounted behind the warps so that the image can be traced onto the warps using ink. This process is called inking on and is done periodically as the tapestry progresses. So this is a completely manual process. We use archival quality Indian ink, and we use an automatic drawing pen, which looks like a very broad, flat calligraphy pen. Each individual warp is marked with the design from the cartoon. It's also then twisted and inked all the way around the thickness of the warp, so that as the warps shift and move during weaving, our design doesn't disappear. Weavers will continue to collaborate with the designing artist or architect, or both, until the tapestry is completed and cut from the loom in a special ceremony at the end. Depending on the scale and complexity, our tapestries can take months or even years to weave. A typical time for a standard size tapestry, say 3 meters by 4 meters, is about 9 months. The more complex the design, obviously, the longer it may take. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some of the projects that I have woven on. Now, these are generally always a team effort, so it's not just me doing this. There'll be a team of 2, 3, or 4, or up to 5, 10 people sometimes, all working together. Around about 2009, we first collaborated with David Noonan, who is an Australian artist who lives and works in London. And though I've only worked on one of his works, there were 2 of them. There was one called Untitled in 2009 and another called Untitled in 2012. So we were transforming both of these works based on his complex digital imagery and using an extremely subtle palette. We were challenged to capture the design's layers, the textures, and the mood. It's a particularly complicated design juxtaposing several different images in an effort on David's part to subvert traditional narratives. Prior to becoming a tapestry, this design was produced through a silkscreen printed onto jute canvas and was exhibited at the Tate Modern in London as part of the group show titled Rings of Saturn in 2006. So I worked on the first of these 2 tapestries, along with Cheryl Thornton, who was the head weaver on the project, and Sue Batten. Some elements within this work are identifiable, while others have remained ambiguous. There's several figures, there's arms, and there's some beautiful peacocks in there too. We aim to retain a sense of uncertain narrative generated by the original artwork, where cryptic shadows morph into identifiable forms. We used a printed version of the digital design as a reference for the translation. In approaching the work, we had no information about the conceptual content of the image. The decision to withdraw this information was made by David. The complex nature of the imagery provided a great challenge to us as we sought to identify elements to exaggerate through the translation from printed design to woven tapestry. So what was quite fun about this image really was its subtlety and its limitations, being monochrome black and white image. There are also elements of transparency and a feeling of depth within the image. And this is one of my favorite things to do in weaving because it's just a little bit magic. And photographic designs and digital collages like this translate really, really well into tapestry. It's often quite challenging, but incredibly rewarding at the same time. As I mentioned, this tapestry has a restricted palette as a monochrome image. We extended that range by expanding the number of tones between the predominant shades. So we're working in what is essentially a grayscale that runs from black to white. Tapestry contains a moderate proportion of cotton, as cotton is able to hold faint colors more successfully than a woolen yarn. There are subtleties in the grays. They're a combination of some slightly warm grays and some slightly cool grays to give a visual shift and some life to the color. The mixes have multiple tones in them. Rarely were the mixes just one flat tone. So this gives a slight flicker or a fleck to the surface and creates a more visually active surface. Here is our weaving team that worked on the project with the artist. So we have from left to right, we have our then studio manager, Sarah Lindsay. We have Weavers, Sue Batten, myself in the middle, Cheryl Thornton, and artist David Noonan on the end there. David was really lovely to work with. He was a very generous artist. He was quite fascinated, I think, with the potential of this medium and what it could bring to his artworks. Textiles have their own qualities and warmth and appeal, and that's something that he has successfully engaged with in other areas of his practice as well, both before and after these two collaborations. Okay, so we're going to go back in time a little bit earlier than the Noonans. So this is the project I worked on just before working with David. And this piece is entitled Alice Bayke. So this is the name of this fictitious character. Woven in 2008, the magnificent Alice Bayke tapestry designed by Yvonne Todd was woven at the ATW. The tapestry was commissioned by Queensland Art Gallery with funds from Tim Fairfax AM and Gina Fairfax to celebrate Queensland Art Gallery's continued relationship with the Pacific. Queensland Art Gallery sought to engage an artist from the Pacific region that was interested in collaborating with the ATW Weavers. After extensive conversations from the Queensland Art Gallery curators and the ATW, Alice Bayke was an image by New Zealand photographer Yvonne Todd was selected. So Alice Bayke was taken from a series of 5 photographs titled Sea of Tranquility, created by Todd in 2002. The original artwork was inspired by Todd's fascination with iconic imagery from the 1960s of celebrity icon Priscilla Presley. Yvonne was compulsively drawn to the heart and artifice of Presley's appearance. As a photographer, she was also really interested in the use of photography in advertising and the techniques used to make products and food look hyper appealing. There's a lot of playfulness in her work and at that time, and it kind of bounced around ideas of the beauty and the grotesque and using unsettling, unexpected details to sometimes subtly and sometimes overtly unnerve the viewer. So there are a lot of fine details in this work that you don't necessarily notice on first appearance. So things like she's got hairs coming down in front of her face that you wouldn't have in a beauty photography shot. Her dress is oversized, doesn't fit her very well. She's got false teeth actually to push her mouth forward, and she's wearing quite a large false eyelashes. She's just got in slight disarray, but she's, you know, got this overall appearance of a wedding photograph that's quite beautiful. So the scale of this one is quite hard to tell, but she's about 3 meters high by 2.5 meters wide. All right. Moving on, this is Hear the Plant Song by artist Janet Laurence for the ATW. And this was cut from the loom in June 2020 by Andrew and Kathy Cameron, who commissioned it. The Camerons commissioned the tapestry for their private collection of Australian contemporary art. Distinctive, complex, and beautiful, the Hear the Plant Song tapestry was hand-woven over 1,300 hours by myself, along with Chris Kocius and Cheryl Thornton. That's me. The fragility of the natural landscape drives Janet Laurence's international art practice. The design allowed the artist to build on her knowledge of the way the ATW Weavers can transform a digital image into tapestry. Hear the Plant Song invites the viewer to submerge themselves in a subaqueous-like undergrowth. The design is a composite digital image that draws on Laurence's extensive image archive, layered with scans of paint dragged on glass, resulting in an ethereal, transparent effect. We tried to capture the reflective qualities of Laurence's tapestry design, transparent glass areas, lines of light, as well as soft painterly and watery effects by using very subtle color mixing techniques and a concise range of green and blue tones. ATW master dyer Tony Stefanovsky dyed 3 new wool tones and 1 new cotton tone in the ATW's on-site colour laboratory to achieve the specific greens we needed. So there were a lot of really beautiful kind of visual moments in this tapestry, lovely visuals and kind of hidden treasures within the design. And we had a really nice time kind of discovering things and lots of little aha moments where things just melded in and out, and little jewels really. The play of the colors is really quite enchanting. Green is a surprisingly diverse color, and we really had to think quite carefully about reserving particular shades of green for certain areas and maintaining that visual interest. I feel like we also ran out of words to describe green: mint green, olive green, apple green, and so on. This tapestry was woven last year during 2020, in the middle of a pandemic. We were able to weave for most of that time. We were locked down for some of it. Sometimes we had to stagger our days to maintain safe distancing, and sometimes only one person was weaving at a time. Fortunately, green is a very soothing and calming color, and it was extremely beneficial to be weaving this during a very stressful time. So there you can see a little bit more of the detail, and you can also see all of the bobbins still in play that we've got hanging there, and all the various combinations of greens that we used. Okay. Still in 2020, the Australian Tapestry Workshop received support from the Play King Foundation to commission 15 Australian artists to develop tapestry designs as part of the Weaving Futures project. As a response to the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, this initiative provided support and new professional development opportunities to artists during a culturally precarious time. So Hayley Miller Bayke, who is a local Melbourne artist, designed I Screamed Aloud, I Will Survive, which I wove this year, 2021. In I Screamed Aloud, I Will Survive, Miller Bayke reflects on her experiences of spending time alone on the coastline as a child, looking outwards into infinite space. When reflecting on these memories now, she imagines herself in present form as an adult. Through concealing her identity in the image, the character could be anyone experiencing this infiniteness. The memory has been reimagined. So we did a little bit of a video for this tapestry, which is on our website. And if you go to our website and have a look under Weaving Futures, there's actually a series of 4 little mini videos interviewing both the artists for each of the 4 projects that we wove and the weavers who collaborated with them. And those are really good little videos just to have a look through and a browse through. So I went into this project in a little bit more detail on that video, and I'll just share a few of my thoughts that I had for that here. And they were really just the things that I try and keep in mind when I'm collaborating with someone and working on a tapestry, particularly in the beginning. And they are that it's really important that we honor the intentions of the designing artist. So we have an interview with them at the beginning to see what is most important to them, what mood or feeling they are trying to capture with their artwork. You noted that this artwork in particular has a really strong elegance to it. The composition is really strong. The central figure has a really commanding presence. Oops, where are we now? Okay, so there is Hayley Miller Bayke and myself, and we're having a big chat about her photograph collage before we started. So the things that were really important to her were just maintaining that ambiguity, that the figure could be any person at any time in history. It doesn't have to be contemporary, it could have been ancient. And I think there is probably a lot of symbolism in there with the 2 birds and the ravens, but she's not really letting on what her symbolism is, and that's again with the ambiguity. Although this is a monochrome image, there are still visual textures that give it a variety and interest. There are areas that are soft and hazy, and there are some very subtle tonal shifts, particularly by increasing the contrast in the mix of yarns in the foreground and reducing the contrast as the weaving progresses. My aim was to suggest an idea of distance and perspective as the horizon disappears off into the sky. So we've got to close up some more of the bobbins and the very, very contrasting mixes that we have in there. This is a more domestic scale tapestry. This was 80 centimeters wide by 60 centimeters high, a lot smaller than all of the other ones that we've seen so far. I used a mix of ATW dyed wool and cotton to weave this tapestries. The warp setting for this one is a lot finer, so the warp that was used is a lot thinner than normal and also spaced more closely at 3.5 warps per centimeter. Started off using 7 strands of wool in my samples and changed my mind partway through and decided that I needed to do my samples with only 5, which really limited the options of the mixes. But sometimes I find that those limitations provide more of a challenge, and you really, really have to think to work within those limitations, which is kind of exciting. So really like problem solving with black and white. Okay, and there we are at the completion of the tapestry. We had a little cutting off ceremony in between all of the craziness of this year. We managed to have a small ceremony with a small number of people, and we each got to cut off our tapestries. Okay. So as well as weaving tapestries, the ATW runs a range of exciting exhibitions, workshops, weaving classes, talks, and events. We also have an artist in residence program where we invite artists to come and spend time in our workshop with us. We hold the Kate Derham Award and the Irene Davies Emerging Artist Award for small tapestries every second year. And we also hold the Tapestry Design Prize for architects every 2 years. If you would like to find out more about upcoming events at the ATW, you can visit our website at www.ostapestry.com.au, and I think there will be some links possibly in the chat or in the Q&A there. All right, this is our last slide. This is the other Janet Laurence one that I have not worked on the previous one. Absolutely beautiful and stunning. Just to wrap up, the ATW is the only tapestry workshop of its kind in Australia, and now only one of a handful across the globe dedicated to the creation of hand-woven tapestries. We are committed to collaborate with exciting leading artists and architects who challenge us and help us push the boundaries of the tapestry medium. Our mission to ensure the art of contemporary tapestry weaving is kept alive and thriving for generations to come. And I thoroughly enjoy working as a weaver at the ATW. I am extremely fortunate to have this as a career. I thank you very much for listening, and I'm going to pass back to Caroline so I can answer some of your questions. Here we go. Welcome back, Caroline.
Thanks, Amy. That was terrific. Really such a fascinating talk on so many different aspects of your work there and the work of the Tapestry Workshop. It's just such a wonderful to hear you speak and truly to see how the ATW is keeping the art of contemporary tapestry alive. That's really wonderful. I also found that your details of working with artists and fellow weavers really interesting, and I think we might have a few more questions on a relation to that and the challenges in each of those very different monochrome and coloured projects that you've worked on. That all sounded fascinating, and clearly you have been challenged but also been rising to the challenges, and that's really interesting to hear. Now, keep on asking questions. We have some questions already, so I will start on the ones that we have. First up, can you talk a little bit more about the process of collaborating on large projects with other weavers? And also, as part of that, how do you make sure that the weaving is consistent across the whole tapestry?
Okay, so we are all in the same space together, and we are constantly having conversations with each other about things that we think will work and things that we think will not work. So there is a dialogue, and that it's ongoing, and that's all day, every day. And there's a lovely kind of chatter that happens across the looms. The sampling process is really important. So if you have 4 weavers working on a project, you might have 4 different approaches to how they think it will work. And invariably there will be bits of all of those ideas that will come together to create the final tapestry. But it is very much a process of trying something, seeing if it works. And it's often quite surprising. We will think that something is really bold, and when you step back from it, it's not bold enough, it's not strong enough. And that also depends on the space that it's going into. If it's going to be going into a large space, and you'll be viewing it from a distance of 10 meters, it'll have to have a lot more punch to it than you might think. Whereas if something's going to be a domestic scale, obviously you have to soften it off a bit so that you can view it from a much closer distance. Yeah, just an ongoing dialogue, really.
It sounds like that. And it sounds like that's one of the very interesting aspects when you're working on a large tapestry, particularly.
Yes, yes. So we sometimes have a little trick that we do. We'll get a pair of binoculars and we'll flip them around backwards, and we'll look through them backwards to get that sense of great distance that we can't necessarily get in the workshop. Even though the workshop is quite a large space, you can't get back 10, 20 meters to view something that might be hanging on a very high wall in an incredibly large architectural space. So you need to be able to visualize the scale of the thing, where it's going to hang. And we used to be able to go and visit spaces and see them and see the walls, but not so much these days.
No, life's changed a little bit. A few questions around the use of wool and cotton and combining them. Lucy asked a question about, do you use wool and cotton in the one weaving, and then has answered part of that herself, saying yes, obviously yes, and mixing, and would you mix cotton and wool on the one bobbin? So perhaps if you could talk a bit about the difference also with working with wool or cotton or combinations of the two, and how that, in terms of how you handle it, but also how it looks.
Yes, so we do combine both. Often what we're trying to get is a quality of colour, and cotton will have a clearer, brighter colour, particularly in the lighter ranges that wool won't have. So wool will tend to grey off, sometimes slightly yellow off as you get into the lighter ranges, so your whites and your pastels. So if you really want a really light, clear colour in a light area, you will tend to use cotton or a combination of wool and cotton. We also use it kind of for a quality of light, like a little bit of a shine or a little bit of a sparkle or a little bit of brightness. So cotton can give it a bit of a pop, whereas if you were trying to make a soft blend, you might choose wool instead, because it actually is, you know, the material itself is softer and the colours do blend better. But generally we use a combination of both.
Terrific. A question from Fran: does the tapestry artist wind all the bobbins in so many different colours, and it seems like a massive task in itself?
Hi, Fran. Yes, it is. We wind everything by hand. So we have our tables set up around our looms with all of the colours that we're going to use, so our entire palette, often with multiples of each colour, and we will work out which mix we want, and we will by hand wind those off by hand and wind them on using, we have a little device called a bobbin winder, but it's a very simple mechanical geared winding device. So basically everything is done manually wherever we can.
Perhaps, Amy, if you can talk a little bit more about the interpretation of the design as it's translated into tapestry and some of the decisions the weavers make during the process.
Okay. The artists and the artworks that we get are very, very different, and no project is the same. You might find aspects of a particular project that might remind you of something we've done before, and you would refer back to a previous set of samples or a previous tapestry and go, okay, well, we did this here and we think that some of that is applicable to here. So we can use it as a starting point or as an example. But every painting is different, and every artist has their own unique marks, and you really want to capture that. So it might be something that's quite characteristic of that artist that you want to use. So it might be the colors that they choose to use, it might be the brush strokes that they use. Photographically, it might be the way that they have mixed those images. So we really have to think about the language that tapestry itself has, and it has its own set of kind of marks, its own kind of language that we know how to apply. And we have to, there's a lot of things you've got to hold in your head at the same time, a lot of concepts of the artist's intention, how is it going to work in the space, how is tapestry going to enhance this artwork, you know, what can we use that is in the tapestry language that is applicable to this particular project. So it's a lot of things, and you kind of think of it as like a repertoire of marks that tapestry can make and things that it can do. So color blending is one of them. You can have really, really subtle color gradations, but you can also have extremely strong contrast. You can have very soft changes. You can do half passing is a weaving technique, which I find quite fun, and we don't use it that often, but it has a particular appearance. So really just trying to find the right techniques and the right combination of those techniques to apply to that individual artwork and design.
We have some lovely comments that I think represent what is good about a presentation like this, Amy. Thank you. How good, what a great presentation. Zoom webinars is a great medium to share art practice across the country, and not only that, across the world. For those that have been a regular listening to some of the lectures we've had with international weavers, so we can not only share with weavers across the world, but also participants that are listening in, which has been terrific. Now, a few questions around here, the Plant Song commission work and how beautiful it was, and how beautiful the image, the actual design, but also the weaving. And a question of how many hours went into that, and I gather over 1,300 hours to weave the Plant Song.
Yes, 1,300 hours. I personally do not count the hours, but there is somebody who does count the hours.
Yes, I think it's probably better not to count your own hours yourself, but to know at the end what it is. And there was some comment about the cost. I think any commissioned costing type things are best referred directly to the workshop themselves.
Yes, any inquiries like that, I would refer you back to our website and to our contact us via email if you want specifics.
Yeah.
Yes.
And a question, do we weave with silk at all?
No, we don't. I'm gathering that probably cost would be the reason for that, but also longevity. I would say that silk is possibly not going to survive as well in terms of you know, exposure to sunlight and deterioration, those kinds of things. So we know that wool and cotton work well and are very long lived, and we want these tapestries to be around for generations to come. So
there's a few questions, Amy, about how you got into tapestry weaving, and also questions at the moment about, is there a formal education in Australia to become a weaver? Do you need a qualification to actually, and how to get into the ATW? So perhaps if you can answer both your own journey to weaving, and then perhaps a little bit on what is available at the moment in terms of courses.
So I kind of fell into it by accident. I did a Bachelor of Fine Arts honours degree at Monash University in Caulfield, and at the time one of the streams that you could take was tapestry. So I was most interested in drawing and a little bit painting, a little bit sculpture. Discovered tapestry by accident. At the time, Kate Durham was running the tapestry department there, and she was really inspirational in I guess just showing what this medium could be and what it could do. And really I hadn't heard of it before starting university, but I ended up majoring in tapestry, and part of that education was doing I think 2 to 3 weeks of work experience at the ATW, and in those 2 to 3 weeks I learned more than I had learned in 3 years of university about this particular art form. So I think being immersed in a working studio space where you've got just the constant talk about art all around you, and you're talking about color, and you're having these amazing conversations about line and contrast and tone and hue, and just really, really interesting things really quite captured me. I think there's also something about the medium where it's kind of mathematical, but it's a kind of intuitive mathematics. It's not, it's a weird blend between technique, science, and intuitive kind of knowing that you acquire over time from your experience and the people around you, and being able to ask questions and being able to try things and really experiment. As for now, in terms of formal education, I don't know of any in Australia. When we need to train new weavers, we do run an internship program, and we get people in who have some understanding, or perhaps have an art degree, or some other background in perhaps graphic design, something visual generally, and that's a starting point for them. So they've got that kind of headspace for art, but then they have to learn the technique with us, and that's a very immersive program. We do run classes for beginners, intermediate, anybody who wants to learn tapestry. It's a really fun kind of craft art to get your head around, and a lot of people really find an affinity for it. So I recommend coming along to one of our beginners classes. So the teachers are really fun, and I occasionally teach a class, but the other teachers are also just really, really lovely, and you'll have a great time.
You're so right, Amy, and it's very addictive for those who've taken workshops. They'll know that they'll keep on coming back, as I have. A question from Tim about the technical aspect. In the I Screamed Aloud, I Will Survive tapestry, Tim was asking, can you talk to us how you approach the sea in that tapestry in the samples?
Hi, Tim. Okay, so I worked on this project in collaboration with Hayley, but I was the sole weaver on this project, so it was up to me to determine the interpretation. And there were lots of limitations with this one because of the scale, because of the time limit that we had, and because it was a very finely woven tapestry, so limited number of strands on the bobbin. So we had 5 strands on the bobbin, which means that if you were trying to blend or shift tones, you had to think about it quite a bit. So I had a fairly kind of mathematical approach to this, and basically what I wanted to think about was that in the foreground, it had the highest contrast, and in the background, as it recedes and you get to the horizon in the sky, you have the lowest contrast. So if you think about the bobbins representing the foreground closest to you would have extremes of black and white, and then you would slowly step those in to get closer and closer and closer and closer and closer until you've got a soft grey at the horizon. But within that kind of system, there were also tones. So there were highlights, there were midtones, and there were shadows. So that was probably one of the most technical tapestries that I've done. And I would not have been able to explain it to anybody else at the time. I don't think. I was very much immersed in it, and really had to kind of nut it out. But it was great challenge, and it was fantastic to see, again, proof of concept, to see that it would work when you think you have an idea, but it's still just in your head, and then you can get it out in the sampling and say, okay, well, this is a bit too much, this is not enough. We've got to find a middle ground here. But yeah, really just a proof of concept to go, okay, I have a visual idea and I can make it work. It's quite satisfying.
Thanks, Amy. A couple of questions, comments about wanting to organise a day out with friends to come to the workshop. Yes, when we're not in lockdown, the workshop is open for visits, and depending on the restrictions around that, there may be some restrictions on numbers, but most of that information will be on the website, and it is an amazing place to visit and see, and you can go up to the mezzanine and see the weavers weaving as well, and there's usually some exhibitions as the Weaving Futures is at the moment, so they're all wonderful to see. Amy, a couple of lovely comments, one from Fleur, a wonderful and generous talk, Amy, thank you. And from Dina, congratulations for your work, amazing tapestry. And Dina is from Argentina. So that's good to see people from around the world. A couple of questions, Amy, about OH&S, sort of your posture, you're sitting a lot. The comment was, Mary said, many of you seem to have very good posture. How do you manage that, take care of your hands and your strength and health?
We're very aware of it because we sit and weave for up to 7.5 hours a day. I think it's a matter of knowing your limitations also. Yes, so we are very aware of the OH&S things. Issues like kind of repetitive strain injuries we have to be aware of, particularly with our wrists. Some of that is to do with just being a bit more relaxed and not being tense. So I think if anybody's ever done any knitting and you know that you've knitted something and you're in a really bad mood and it's been really, really tight, your knitting gets tight, but also you hurt yourself. So when we're weaving, we kind of have to have a bit of a more relaxed stance, I guess. Our looms are adjustable. Our chairs are adjustable, so we can adjust the height of the weaving that we're working on, and we can adjust the height of the chair that we're sitting on and footrests so that everything's all ergonomic, and so we can maintain good posture. We also take breaks every about 20 minutes, get up, walk back, see what you've done, have a conversation with someone about what you think is working and what's not, move around. We also like to go up on the mezzanine and have a look from a bit of a distance, because that gives us a perspective where, you know, you're not looking at something that's 20 centimeters away from your face the whole time. You're actually seeing it from the distance it will be viewed, and that's important as well.
Amy, a question, when you talked earlier about the traditional method that you use, Ash has asked, do you explore other techniques such as First Nations techniques at all?
Love to. We have an artist in residence program, and we often get weavers from lots of different cultures. I'm not sure if we've had any weavers, First Nations weavers making tapestries or weaving techniques. We've certainly had First Nations artists doing other things, creating possum skin cloaks and all kinds of beautiful textile works. So I would love to. There's a very fine line there between kind of appropriation that you don't necessarily want to cross, but we are very open to learning from other artists. And you know, the wonderful thing about this job is that you get so many different artists coming in and collaborating, and we learn from them and they learn from us, and that is really just the most kind of dynamic and interesting thing about this job, is that the people that you meet and the cultures that you learn about that you wouldn't otherwise be exposed to.
And even for friends of the workshop or people that are connected that want to come in, when there have been artist in residence talks, they've been really super interesting, I find too, because they are bringing so many different skills to the conversation.
Yes, can I just add to that too, that
yes.
When that residency program is up and running at its kind of fullest, those artists will often teach workshops. So we had artists from Indonesia at the start of last year who taught batik technique and ran a class, and that was amazing. So we really, really hope that, you know, once everything settles down, we can go back to having our artists in residence, you know, doing those workshops and sharing those skills and having that interaction with the public as well as with us.
Amy, a question from Pam. Which tapestry do you consider has been the most difficult for you to interpret, and why?
Oh.
Or that you want to admit on?
I think, well, look, the Hayley Miller Baker was the most recent one that was quite a head twister. But prior to that, probably the Yvonne Todd, Alice Bayke, because that was the first photographic image that I had woven on. And I think that was fairly new still for the workshop too, to do that kind of photographic photorealism in tapestry. And at least I haven't seen it prior to that. A lot of the things that we did, I think, prior to that were painting based. So, you know, kind of John Olsen, really beautiful works and things. But I don't think that we had taken that step into kind of, you know, hyper-real, photorealistic tapestry weaving. So that was really, really exciting to think that well, this is a massive challenge, but yeah, I think it'll work and we can do it. So we were fairly confident, and if we were falsely confident or not, Sue Batten and I going into that project, both really, really excited about it. And it's still probably one of my favorites to look at, particularly her dress. And I don't know that there were any really good close-ups of her dress on there, but her dress is this kind of, it's polyester, cheap from an op shop kind of tacky wedding dress, but it catches the light in a certain way. So there's some really rich colors in there that you don't necessarily see straight up, because it looks like it's kind of a white dress, but there's purples and there's pinks and there's all these kinds of different unexpected colors in there. It's got a really good sheen to it. And there's areas where there's kind of like there's gauze on her sleeve, so you can see her skin tone through the sleeve, and there's the ruffles and there's all of this detail and little pearls and things. So that was probably one of my favorites, but super challenging, and kind of being thrown in at the deep end as still quite an inexperienced rookie. So thank you, Sue, for guiding me through that.
A question, a comment first, and absolutely from Gay, an absolutely fascinating talk. So well done, Amy. And she asked, is it possible to have access to this presentation for other people at other times? And just talking about those that know about the ATW and those that don't, and people in, I think in Perth were talking about it, we're hearing about it for the first time. And so I think it's fair to say, Amy, that all of these sort of this lecture and other presentations are available live on the website, or the links are there for whatever technology they were taken on.
Yes, I believe it's being recorded, and I think it will be available on our YouTube channel later on, maybe in a day or so once it's all up and running. There is a whole series of artist talks up on our YouTube channel, and there's also a whole range of videos of the makings of tapestries, and we did a lot of time-lapse photography of previous projects. So over the year or so of weaving a tapestry, you have progressive shots of it in progress, and us kind of zipping around weaving it. So there is a lot of content on the website. I have a great time trawling through it and looking back at past projects. Photography is absolutely stunning. The website design is beautiful. So yes, spend some time browsing through that and the YouTube channel, and you'll find lots of content.
Amy, there's a couple of questions too about one from Angeli, who is, being French, are you in contact or have exchange ideas with Aubusson or other French ateliers? And also one about contact with Gobelin itself in Paris. And I don't know whether you want to make a comment on that. We do have, you know, there's obviously been some sharing across different organisations that do workshops, that do have workshops across the world. They're in answer to a question, is there another tapestry workshop in Australia? No, there isn't. Amy, do you want to make any comment about overseas connections?
I think probably the workshop overseas that we have the most contact with is the Dovecot. And we have done several weaver exchanges where weavers from Australia have gone over and worked over in Edinburgh. And also, I think, I'm not sure where the other one was, but we've had weavers from there come over to us, and we've had our weavers go over to them. And in particular, Archie Brennan was a massive influence on the Australian Tapestry Workshop. So he was based at the Dovecot, and came out here and taught our first 6 original weavers. So a lot of what we learned about the connection between art and tapestry comes from Archie Brennan and his particular philosophy. So that's a whole other lecture. So, but good to look up anyway. I don't know about the French one so much. I don't know that we have so much connection with them, and possibly that might be a language barrier thing, but it's a little hard to learn French.
And historically, there have been some tours that have visited Aubusson and Paris too, and had visits, which has been fantastic for those that have gone on those tours run privately. A question directed to you: do you design any tapestries for yourself?
When I get some time, yes. I do. I have a separate artistic practice, which is drawing and also weaving. So we did mention earlier the Kate Derham Award and the Irene Davies Awards. We run that every second year, and we as weavers love to put something into that, to enter that competition, because you get such a broad spectrum of different artworks, and they're quite small, so they have to be under, I think, 30 centimeters. So you can see a lot of tapestry from a lot of different people from all over the world in a very small space, and so that's quite nice. So I like to enter that, and I'll enter that one again this year. Entry deadline is, I think, 9th of August, so I'm going to get on with it.
Details on the website. Well, I'd like to have one comment from our participants. Can't wait to delve into some classes. We'll visit the ATW for sure. Thanks so much for your inspirational talk today, Amy. I was blown away by the beauty of the plant song. Strong emotions sent tears down my cheeks, and look forward to visiting ATW one day, which is a wonderful way to lead into our close of this today. Amy, thank you again. It's been wonderful to have you join us and talk so openly and with such interest about how you and the weavers work on projects together and work with the artists. It couldn't have been more interesting. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone from around the world who's joined us today. And it has been great to have you online, and thanks for all the questions that you sent through. That is, there's lots of interest out there, and we really appreciated your questions and the ability and to be able to put them to Amy, and who so ably answered them. And if you'd like to learn more about the ATW, please visit the website. As part of Open House Melbourne, there will be a range of digital content for you to deep dive into on the website. So feel free to roam over that, and yes, come and visit and take classes and be involved in whichever way that is appropriate. Amy, thank you again. It's really been a fantastic insight from you into your experiences at the workshop and how contemporary art is delivered at the workshop. It's been great to hear you. Thanks so much, and thank you everyone for joining us. Goodbye.
Thank you.